Waldron sat down, and after a chirrup from the chairman, Professor Challenger rose and advanced to the edge of the platform. In the interest of my paper, I took down his speech verbatim. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, amid a sustained interruption from the back. "I beg pardon, ladies, gentlemen, and children. I must apologize. I had inadvertently omitted a considerable section of this audience tumult, during which the professor stood with one hand raised and his enormous head nodding sympathetically, as if he were bestowing a pontifical blessing upon the crowd. I have been selected to move a vote of thanks to Mr. Waldron for the very picturesque and imaginative address to which we have just listened. There are points in it with which I disagree, and it has been my duty to indicate them as they arose. But nonetheless, Mr. Waldron has accomplished his object well, that object being to give a simple and interesting account of what he conceives to have been the history of our planet. Popular lectures are the easiest to listen to, but Mr. Waldron here," he beamed and blinked at the lecturer, "will excuse me when I say that they are necessarily both superficial and misleading, since they have to be graded to the comprehension of an ignorant audience." Ironical cheering. Popular lectures are in their nature parasitic. Angry gesture of protest from Mr. Waldron. They exploit for fame or cash the work which has been done by their indigent and unknown brethren. One smallest new fact, obtained in the laboratory, one brick built into the Temple of Science far outweighs any second-hand exposition which passes an idle hour but can leave no useful result behind it. I put forward this obvious reflection not out of any desire to disparage Mr. Waldron in particular, but that you may not lose your sense of proportion and mistake the acolyte for the high priest. At this point Mr. Waldron whispered to the chairman, who half rose and said something severely to his water carafe. But enough of this. Loud and prolonged cheers. Let me pass to some subject of wider interest. What is the particular point upon which I, as an original investigator, have challenged our lecturer's accuracy? It is upon the permanence of certain types of animal life upon the earth. I do not speak upon this subject as an amateur, nor, I may add, as a popular lecturer, but I speak as one whose scientific conscience compels him to adhere closely to facts when I say that Mr. Waldron is very wrong in supposing that, because he has never himself seen a so-called prehistoric animal, therefore these creatures no longer exist. They are indeed, as he has said, our ancestors, but they are, if I may use the expression, our contemporary ancestors, who can still be found with all their hideous and formidable characteristics if one has but the energy and hardihood to seek their haunts. Creatures which were supposed to be Jurassic, monsters who would hunt down and devour our largest and fiercest mammals, still exist. Cries of bosh. Prove it. How do you know? Question. How do I know, you ask me? I know because I have visited their secret haunts. I know because I have seen some of them. Applause, uproar, and a voice. Liar. Amialiar. General hearty and noisy assent. Did I hear someone say that I was a liar? Will the person who called me a liar kindly stand up that I may know him? A voice. Here he is. Sir. And an inoffensive little person in spectacles, struggling violently, was held up among a group of students. Did you venture to call me a liar? No, sir, no, shouted the accused, and disappeared like a jack-in-the-box. If any person in this hall dares to doubt my veracity, I shall be glad to have a few words with him after the lecture. Liar. Who said that? Again the inoffensive one, plunging desperately, was elevated high into the air. If I come down among you, general chorus of "Come, love, come," which interrupted the proceedings for some moments, while the chairman, standing up and waving both his arms, seemed to be conducting the music. The professor, with his face flushed, his nostrils dilated, and his beard, bristling, was now in a proper berserk mood. Every great discoverer has been met with the same incredulity, the sure brand of a generation of fools. When great facts are laid before you, you have not the intuition, the imagination which would help you to understand them. You can only throw mud at the men who have risked their lives to open new fields to science. You persecute the prophets. Galileo, Darwin, and I prolonged, cheering in complete interruption. All this is from my hurried notes taken at the time, which give little notion of the absolute chaos to which the assembly had by this time been reduced. So terrific was the uproar that several ladies had already beaten a hurried retreat. Grave and reverend seniors seemed to have caught the prevailing spirit as badly as the students, and I saw white-bearded men rising and shaking their fists at the obdurate professor. The whole great audience seethed and simmered like a boiling pot. The professor took a step forward and raised both his hands. There was something so big and arresting and virile in the man that the clatter and shouting died gradually away before his commanding gesture and his masterful eyes. He seemed to have a definite message. They hushed to hear it. "I will not detain you," he said. "It is not worth it. Truth is truth, and the noise of a number of foolish young men, and I fear I must add of their equally foolish seniors, cannot affect the matter. I claim that I have opened a new field of science. You dispute it." Cheers. "Then I put you to the test. Will you accredit one or more of your own number to go out as your representatives and test my statement in your name?" Mr. Summerlee, the veteran professor of comparative anatomy, rose. Among the audience, a tall, thin, bitter man, with the withered aspect of a theologian. He wished, he said, to ask Professor Challenger whether the results to which he had alluded in his remarks had been obtained during a journey to the headwaters of the Amazon made by him 2 years before. Professor Challenger answered that they had. Mr. Summerlee desired to know how it was that Professor Challenger claimed to have made discoveries in those regions which had been overlooked by Wallace, Bates, and other previous explorers of established scientific repute. Professor Challenger answered that Mr. Summerlee appeared to be confusing the Amazon with the Thames, that it was in reality a somewhat larger river, that Mr. Summerlee might be interested to know that with the Orinoco, which communicated with it, some 50,000 miles of country were opened up, and that in so vast a space it was not impossible for one person to find what another had missed. Mr. Summerlee declared, with an acid smile, that he fully appreciated the difference between the Thames and the Amazon, which lay in the fact that any assertion about the former could be tested, while about the latter it could not. He would be obliged if Professor Challenger would give the latitude and the longitude of the country in which prehistoric animals were to be found. Professor Challenger replied that he reserved such information for good reasons of his own, but would be prepared to give it with proper precautions to a committee chosen from the audience. Would Mr. Summerlee serve on such a committee and test his story in person? Mr. Summerlee: "Yes, I will." Great cheering. Professor Challenger: "Then I guarantee that I will place in your hands such material as will enable you to find your way. It is only right, however, since Mr. Summerlee goes to check my statement, that I should have one or more with him who may check his. I will not disguise from you that there are difficulties and dangers. Mr. Summerlee will need a younger colleague. May I ask for volunteers? It is thus that the great crisis of a man's life springs out at him. Could I have imagined when I entered that hall that I was about to pledge myself to a wilder adventure than had ever come to me in my dreams? But Gladys, was it not the very opportunity of which she spoke? Gladys would have told me to go. I had sprung to my feet. I was speaking, and yet I had prepared no words. Tarp Henry, my companion, was plucking at my skirts, and I heard him whispering, "Sit down, Malone. Don't make a public ass of yourself." At the Same time I was aware that a tall, thin man, with dark gingery hair a few seats in front of me, was also upon his feet. He glared back at me with hard, angry eyes, but I refused to give way. "I will go, Mr. Chairman." I kept repeating over and over again. "Name, name," cried the audience. "My name is Edward Dunn Malone. I am the reporter of the Daily Gazette. I claim to be an absolutely unprejudiced witness." "What is your name, sir?" the chairman asked of my tall rival. "I am Lord John Roxton. I have already been up the Amazon. I know all the ground and have special qualifications for this investigation." Lord John Roxton's reputation as a sportsman and a traveler is, of course, world famous, said the chairman. At the same time, it would certainly be as well to have a member of the press upon such an expedition. "Then I move," said Professor Challenger, "that both these gentlemen be elected as representatives of this meeting to accompany Professor Summerlee upon his journey to investigate and to report upon the truth of my statements." And so, amid shouting and cheering, our fate was decided, and I found myself borne away in the human current which swirled towards the door, with my mind half stunned by the vast new project which had risen so suddenly before it. As I emerged from the hall, I was conscious for a moment of a rush of laughing students down the pavement and of an arm wielding a heavy umbrella, which rose and fell in the midst of them. Then, amid a mixture of groans and cheers, Professor Challenger's electric brougham slid from the curb, and I found myself walking under the silvery lights of Regent Street, full of thoughts of Gladys and of wonder as to my future. Suddenly there was a touch at my elbow. I turned and found myself looking into the humorous, masterful eyes of the tall, thin man who had volunteered to be my companion on this strange quest. "Mr. Malone, I understand," said he. "We are to be companions. What? My rooms are just over the road in the Albany. Perhaps you would have the kindness to spare me half an hour, for there are one or two things that I badly want to say to you."